Kids of Reddit, what is something your parents do that they don't realize hurts you? Constantly correcting and moaning about minor details makes you feel like you're incapable. You're too young to be tired, to feel pain, etc. It doesn't really hurt me. It's just annoying. Edit. Sometimes it hurts, depending on the situation. My mom did this to me all my life, and even as an adult. When I got out of the army, I was at her house for some reason, and I was really stressed, and she just looked at me like I was the biggest idiot in the world, and said, "What on earth could you possibly have to be stressed about?" Quote. I was like, well, I'm a combat veteran, I'm pregnant, and I just started taking classes in one of the most rigorous engineering programs in the country. But you're right, nothing to see here. I told my therapist that story a decade or so later, and she explained that parents who treat their kids like this don't see them as real people. There are people, and then there are the kids who are not taken as seriously as people. Made perfect sense. Greater than, what on earth could you possibly have to be stressed about? Quote. Greater than therapist explained that parents who treat their kids like this don't see them as real people. There are people, and then there are the kids who are not taken as seriously as people. Made perfect sense. This should be the top comment here. I know a lot of people say kids don't have perspective, life experience. There are still consequences of being a kid, like being beaten for having bad grades. Some of these parents consider anything up to an or bad. Or failing a test means repeating a grade, not skipping a grade. And kids have to deal with bullying. Totally. I read something in a parenting book. I can't remember which one because it was forever ago, when my kids were little, and it said that if you don't take your kids' small concerns seriously, they won't come to you with their big concerns, because to them, the concerns have always been big. Now, while I do not consider my kids' concerns small, as you mentioned, things like bullying, tests, grades, etc., are very legit problems that kids and teens face every day. The point is fairly solid in general. If we minimize our kids' concerns by saying something like, "You think getting good grades is tough? Just wait until you have a mortgage to pay," then they realize that they're not being taken seriously. And that's a pretty fucked up thing to do to somebody we claim to love. My kids are a little older now, 17, 12, and 9, and we've seen a lot of different situations in their lives. But my biggest priority in all of it is to treat them with respect because they're just learning how to do this, whatever it is at that time. And maybe they will look back years later and think it was a small thing. But in that moment, it was the biggest thing, and it's only right to respect their perspective in the moment, and help without judgment. This is so true. Adult problems like work or a mortgage are easier to deal with, just because you know how stuff works and can usually cope if something goes wrong. You can self-regulate your emotions a lot better. You have perspective and you know when something goes wrong. It's not the end of the world. Generally speaking, people don't yell at you or condescend to you for making mistakes. When you're a kid, you don't have any of that. Your world is pretty small. You have little control over your life or routine, and you're pretty much totally reliant on your parents, who may be terrible at parenting. I think people tend to retain only the good childhood memories tbh. Like it's easy to remember it is this idyllic time when everything was taken care of for you and you just had fun all day. It's harder to remember how scared you felt when you were getting yelled at by someone 4 times your size, or how isolating it was when your classmates were mean to you. My parents didn't teach me Spanish so I wouldn't have a hard time learning English while I was in school. Now I can't speak with 90% of my relatives. That's too bad. I've got second cousins living in Quebec whose mother is from Costa Rica. They were trilingual and fluent in English, Spanish, and French by the time they were 6. They had these funny little French-Canadian Spanish accents for a while. But now they've got exceptional language skills. My dad refuses to teach me about finances because he wanted me to learn firsthand. He refused to help me open my own account or access the account he put all my money in. He refused to teach me the meaning of terms or help me with forms. I now have a full-blown mental breakdown when I have to do anything involving the bank because I just don't know how it works. I'm good with cash, but I would consider myself financially illiterate. Edit. Since some people are confused, I'm answering questions here. My dad fully understands finances. He is a successful divorce lawyer married to an ex-banker. He also didn't give me money. He took my money and put it in a bank account. Told me to access it when I had no form of ID. I do utilize online information, but I have some sensory input issues that make it a little more difficult for me. Not impossible, just harder. Thank you everyone who left advice and sources. I will be checking them all out. I appreciate how kind most people are being about this. This isn't helping, but I kinda taught myself financial literacy when I was little just by following my parents to the bank and reading all the pamphlets. My parents didn't teach me anything either. I just read financial literacy books from the library. You can also visit your bank's website and familiarize yourself with their services in Google anything you're unsure about. Alternatively, you can have a chat with a teller at your bank to discuss things you don't know about. It's their job to serve their customers after all. When I was a teen and I would come downstairs and they would say something like, "Look, WHO is finally out of their room. Thanks for bringing the attention to it." Going back to my room now. My mother constantly complains about paying her own bills 24/7. My parents got divorced when I was 10 because she cheated and moved out. As a result, she had to get her own place, work, and pay for things. She complains about paying for water, electric, food, her mortgage, etc. All stuff any person has to pay. Stuff that I have to pay too. Yet I'm 23 and don't complain and live on my own. She genuinely still thinks she's entitled to some sort of financial support from my dad and whines about how poor she is all of the time. He still pays for her health insurance, and even that's not good enough. Her constant complaining has always made me resent her. When I tell her to stop complaining because it bothers me, she doesn't understand why, and tells me it shouldn't bother me because she deserves more money. She then lectures me on how shitty she thinks my dad is for not continuing to give her money. He literally gave her $1,000 a month in child support even though I lived at his house, and he paid for all of my bills until I was 21. Opposite situation for me. My mom is absolutely financially dependent on me, but she always expresses how much she hates that I put so much money into the house. And she urges me to save some money for myself. Thing is, she doesn't try to get any of the other 3 adults here to pay more because they will yell on, complain and get verbally aggressive. And my mom has no spine. Ha, it's a joke because she's got severe scoliosis. But yeah, I don't hate my mom for relying on me. I hate everyone else for complaining about standard sublet agreements on splitting the $800 electric bill or the $1,300 mortgage. Staying together for the sake of us. Both my sister and I would be much happier if they just bit the bullet and divorced. I'd much rather live in 2 happy houses than in one unhappy one. I met quite a few people who wouldn't divorce because of the kids. But for some it's just an excuse to stay. They don't want to hurt the kids, but they can't imagine that most of the time it's even more damaging to stay together. My dad thinks I'm completely useless and a waste of time. He has no problem putting me down in front of other people. And he doesn't like to be challenged. Mom just tells me to get over it. He's your father. Quote. Meanwhile, everyone thinks he's some great guy at home who's incredibly helpful and perfect and kind and so on. Criticizing things I like that they don't understand because they don't understand them, monsieur. I'm a little older now and I remember at some point I stopped talking about things I like, music I like, TV shows I liked, etc. 'Cause I thought my parents just wouldn't care for them. They sometimes criticized me for them, but mostly just didn't care. Fast forward 20 years. I feel like a recluse with stuff I'm interested in. So since I feel this way, I have to try hard and be more open and get out of the safe feeling comfort zone more often with my interests. How I can relate. My whole family poked fun at everything I liked or had an opinion about growing up, mercilessly ganging up and tearing apart every aspect of something that brings someone joy or intrigue isn't harmful teasing. Now I have a niece who is almost a teen and I see the same shit happening to her. Like I did when I was in her position. She eventually loses her shit. Like violent blind rage. Because she can't take being belittled and made to feel like an imbecile for just liking things or voicing her thoughts. Then my family has the audacity to discipline her for not being able to control her anger. Having literally been in her shoes, I've tried to intervene and back her up. My family even notices the pattern and has turned to me asking me how we can work together to fix her behavior. And when I said, "It's not her, it's all of you," they start in on ridiculing my knowledge. For context, I have a BS in psych and a MS in applied anthropology. Obviously, my personal experience and education have rendered me ill-equipped to understand the situation. It baffles me how they're in denial of what they're doing. I stopped talking years ago at family get-togethers because it's easier than being shit all over. I just eat my food. And I fidget or pet the dogs until enough time has surpassed for it to be socially acceptable to leave. It's really fucked me up when it comes to socializing outside of the family, or articulating just about anything. The saying not to cry, stop crying or I will give you something to cry about. End result, I was physically unable to cry at my grandmother's funeral. Thanks, Dad. Greater than, stop crying or I will give you something to cry about. Greater than end result, I was physically unable to cry at my grandmother's funeral. Very relatable. Unfortunately, literally spoiling my stepbro in front of me and telling me to shut the FCK up if I say anything against him. I'm old, but this happened to me. I had a stepsister. My stepdad refused to hug me or bond with me. He didn't want my stepsister to get jealous. So I was kept at arm's length. She was spoiled. I was treated like Cinderella. I never felt love. I ran away at 16 and my life was really hard. I have only recently began to fix my life and go back to school and stuff. My advice to you? Try not to let them determine your self-worth. And learn to love yourself. One day you will move out and make your own life. Don't let them spoil your future. Couldn't agree more. Soon enough they will be in your rear-view mirror with your life in front of you. The value others place on you is not your value. That's determined by you. Value you. It's so very important. Even as an early adult, they don't realize their actions can hurt people because they think they're such great parents. Growing up, I would often get yelled at or threatened to get spanked for making mistakes. Not to mention they get annoyed or even angry for simple things I did, like laying in my room in the dark, listening to music, wearing a sweater, or even drying my face after washing it. To this day they still think they did a good job raising me. Whoa, drying your face? How do they get mad when you do that? My parents yell at me for little things, but drying your face? I ain't kiddin'. They always assume I'm afraid of water because of it. It's something they don't do. They never apologize. Not once. Not ever. And if you bring up something they did wrong, they immediately change the subject. If mine ever apologized, it was, "Well, I'm sorry, I'm such an awful mother." My mom's family has a history of heart disease, and because of that she's always been overly cautious about weight, etc. I have a build different to her and my sister, who are both super skinny without having to put much effort into it. I grew up being fat shamed to the point that even a comment from her sets me off now, and I thought I was fat and ugly for the longest time. I wasn't. Gained a little now though, can't lie. She thinks her constant comments are to get me to care about my health, but it made me very insecure in my mid to late teens. This is the common mistake that parents does in any topic, unfortunately. Thank you so much for watching and have a good day.